Welcome back to another episode of Supercoach Mates. In this one, we'll be following a similar structure to last week, looking at some player comparisons. So let's get straight into it. So the first player comparison we'll do is these two pod defenders in Sard and Redmond, who have scored pretty well in the past 2 weeks. Are either of these two on your radar? And if so, which one would you be looking for, Tom?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It seems like running defenders had the flavour of the month, really. Yeah, it's a tough one because, those guys are doing a lot better than the likes of Ridley, Doherty, and so on and so forth. Sicily even didn't score that well this week in comparison. So I think out of the two, I've watched both these games quite closely, but I'd probably pick Sard. He actually looks like a very decent option this year. At no point does he look like he slows down in a quarter. Redmond, for example, he intercepted everything, but it was against a pretty shitty Gold Coast side. He went nuts in the first quarter. I think he was almost at 50 at quarter time, so he slowed down significantly. He's got a habit of doing that. Redmond's also a pain in the ass for Ridley, who I own, but Sard, I think you can more confidently own. He doesn't phase out too much in quarters, and he does the same role week in, week out. He's got a really nice role at the moment, and it's showing with double tons so far. And at any point for him, when he doesn't look like scoring a ton, he just somehow manages it. But what are your thoughts on these two?
I think there are far better options, so I'd be avoiding both. And if you've got them, good, but if you don't, you should be looking at other options like your Daicoses and even some other mid-prices, which we'll touch on later. So avoid both of them.
Yeah. I think, what John is just saying is like, you've got so many 500k options at the moment where you can save a lot of money. They're doing as equally as better. Whereas, Redmond is in that boat, but someone like Assad is 650k. So unless he's going 120, 130, you'd be picking someone 500k. But I think the problem is at the moment is so many of these cheaper players are doing super well, which is a concern for
exactly.
guys who've gone the Uber Premium route because it's really costing it money wise. So we'll move on quickly now to the second point of discussion, which is the Midprice Madness season, I think. Basically, if you got all the mid prices, you're laughing, unfortunately, this year. So Setterfield and Zeeble are pretty much the top two that everyone either has already or is looking to bring in. I'm in the same dilemma, actually, so I'll be interested to see if, Jonas, you have an opinion on this one. Who would you bring out of these two, or do you think both of them are must-haves purely because of role and scoring potential? But if you had to pick one or, either both or one, who would you go for and why?
Yep, so these are two players I'd be far more inclined to be looking at than the past two. It's tough to decide which one to pick because Setterfield's coming off a great score and is a bit younger and has like a midfield role. I think he's as close to a must-have as you can get, but the issue is you've already got a lot of mid-prices in the midfield that you can pick, which means someone like Zeeble is a bit more valuable, in my opinion, and could become a keeper. So if I had to pick only one of them, I'd be going Zeeble because he'll have that defender forward eligibility. He has a chance of being a keeper. He has that role locked up. And Setterfield had a bit of ice on his quad at the end of the game, which concerns me a bit. But just saying that, I think they're both great options and we'll make plenty of cash. I just don't see Setterfield being a keeper because we've got so many good mid options that are going to fall in price.
I think just continue on this before I have my 2 cents worth. Do you reckon that obviously Zeeble has a role of previous years, which, last time he had this role, he was pretty much a top 6 forward and rebounded, rose in cash ridiculously well, and it seems like he's doing the same here. My concern with Setterfield, and I want to see if you share the same sentiment, if you look at who he's played so far, first round Hawthorn, who are shit house this year, Gold Coast, which aren't great, but he went berserk. I think he kept a couple goals as well to get his score to 147. He's got our boys next week. without Steele, I could see him doing quite well. Is he one that purely based on the fact he's obviously gone berserk this week and done pretty well last week, and he probably should do pretty well again this week? Is he one that you just have to grab because of the cash rise, or are you more inclined in thinking long term where who knows how his body holds up across 22 games playing pure midfield, or, against a stronger midfield side? Or on the flip side, Zeeble, obviously, if Aaron Hall does come back in, does he have to shift off because of Sheezel? And obviously his injury concerns have been well documented over the last couple of years.
I think we know what you'll get with Zeeble. He's shown the ability to score that in the past. I think the midfield matchup for Setterfield is a slight issue, but he's not going to get tagged. He just does everything well. Like, he tackles, 9 tackles and stuff like that. So Setterfield might drop a tiny bit of scoring. Like, he won't average what he's currently averaging, but I still see him making 150k very easily.
Yeah.
I just like the upside of Zeeble in terms of being able to potentially pick up a keeper for the price he's at is too appealing for my liking. So for me, yeah, there are a few question marks over Setterfield, but they're both excellent options. And if you can, get both in. But for me, I can only really get one of them in. And so I'm leaning towards Zeeble.
Yeah. Well, I'm in that dilemma at the moment. The only reason I am leaning towards Zeeble is because I'm sick of playing one of Mackenzie and Ashcroft on the bench and always losing out.
Yeah.
Remaining score. It happened to me twice. I had Ashcroft first round and then it lost. Mackenzie's good score, lost 40 points, and then vice versa, the other round lost 50 points. So I think that might change if Hopper doesn't get up, which is looking likely. It's a tough one to be in. But yeah, Zeeble, I think, just has a runs on the ball previously. Setterfield's a bit of an unknown playing pure midfield moving forward. But anyway, it's a tough one. And I think opinions will change as we move on throughout the week. Moving forward to two players who have probably pissed off more coaches than less. Tanner Bruin and Flanders, who are both massive hype picks going into round one and were, considered locks in everyone's side. But you look at the scores from this week, both basically scored exactly the same. Their biggest issue is their time on ground, which usually means one of two things. It's either they're unfit and they can't run out a game in their desired position, or they're a liability, really, to their sides, that they're just not worth it. Is there, definite trade outs with these guys? I mean, you could probably throw Callahan in the mix as well with his injury and shit score, Jonas, but you reckon, especially these two, do you reckon they're immediate trade outs, or is there merit in keeping any one of these two for one more week if you do own, just to see if there's any change in scoring?
No, they're the easiest trade outs of them all. If you had to make me pick between trading one of them out, it would be Bruin, because he's more expensive, but I think they both got to go. Look at that. Like, they're averaging 10 and 11 disposals respectively, and they're not getting much time on ground. So no, they've got to go. The easy avenues to get to some of your rookies like Chandler and perhaps anyone else you've missed, as well as some of those mid prices we've talked about. So I wouldn't be wasting any more time. I'd be getting rid of them. They've got enough problems.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think if you can flick them on to even your Setterfields and Zeebles, it's a bonus. They're just not scoring at all, and they're proving a liability on field. Like, I got rid of Bruin for Warple, and it basically banked me another 50 points ahead of that. So I think sometimes, especially in the early rounds, you've got to be a little bit brutal with your decision making. It's always the case, if you wait one more week, it can really cost you, points, total point scoring wise. But moving on to another big issue that I think a few owners would have, but hopefully not both. Obviously, Gawn went down injured within the first minute of the game and didn't return. I think it's an MCL injury, I'm pretty sure. So at least minimum 4 to 5. I'm not 100% sure. And yeah. Sean Darcy, I think we all own him, as in from Supercoach Mates. Absolute pain in the ass when he decided to play up forward and did fuck all, I think. He was on -4 on halftime or something ridiculous. What do we do with these two? I know you've got some opinions on Darcy, but obviously Gawn's a trade out due to injury. What are your thoughts? Obviously there is merit in holding Darcy, but what are your thoughts on trade out options for either of these two, really?
I don't hate the idea of holding Darcy and seeing one more week, see how he goes against West Coast, who Ruckman have scored very well against in the first 2 weeks. And perhaps if he's playing a bit of time forward, he gets ruck forward DPP and becomes a top 6 forward, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I want to give him one more week, but I see the merit in trading him because he's got a high break even. There are some other good ruck options. So is one you can go either or on. I think it purely comes down to who you're bringing in place of him. Are you going down to like a Darcy Cameron and then elevating a rookie up to a good mid-pricer? Because if that's the case, then that's not a bad trade at all.
Yeah.
If you've got no other problems, yeah, I'd be trading Darcy out. But say you've got a Jack Steele or someone else who's a clear trade out like a Max Gawn, I'd be definitely prioritising that before looking at Darcy, because Darcy still has the ability to bounce back. Fremantle played very poorly. You'd expect them to sort of show some sort of fight against West Coast, which means he'll be tapping down to some midfielders. So, yeah, I'm more inclined to hold Darcy and sort of see how he goes. I did the same. It's the same with Laird last week. People traded him out and he bounced back. What if Darcy goes 160 against West Coast? You'll have a bit of egg on your face if you've traded out a player who then goes 160. So I'd rather wait and be sure to trade him out rather than trade him out now and then regret later when he goes big. If he can't score well against West Coast,
he's off.
We know something's wrong, and you can comfortably trade him out without being concerned that he'll burn you. But for the time being, I'm more in the camp of holding. But if it gets you some of those other must-have players, then it's completely understandable. But where are you leaning on this one, Tom?
Well, I'm in this sticky conundrum as well because unfortunately I have a few issues now with Darcy was the least of my concerns, and now he became a problem, obviously. Darcy, I've got Steele. I don't have Daicos, so there's a few issues to burn out. He's one that I'm in the same boat as Jonas. I think I'm literally forced to hold Darcy because I don't have enough trades to bring in, because my top priority is Zeeble or Setterfield and Daicos, so I can't afford Darcy to get rid of Darcy. The other thing I would want to know your opinion, Jonas, on this, but I get that he's gonna, potentially go 160, 170 against West Coast. Clearly, him playing up forward did not work. I'm not sure if that was a suggested strategy by Longmuir, but it would make no sense having him up forward and Jackson in the ruck. Considering Jackson a lot more mobile, so there either is an underlying issue or a niggling issue, or that's just what they decided to do. I think it was quite a Nathan, who's unfortunately not with us tonight, but he noticed it was quite muggy and hot, so it could be a reason that he couldn't last in the ruck, but I don't exactly know the behinds of that. But what are your thoughts potentially? So obviously we look at, moving up to English and Wits, Marshall if you somehow don't own him, but looking at the flip side, you're saving yourself money going down to Darcy Cameron. Is another name that pops to mind, who's done ridiculously well so far this season against some decent ruckmen. What are your thoughts on saving some money on someone like a Darcy Cameron, or from a Sean Darcy to a Cameron as a Collingwood supporter? Because we know that Cameron's going to go up in price quite heavily due to his 2 good scores.
Yeah, I don't mind the option at all. I think it's the best Darcy replacement you can go for because he's purely cheaper than, say someone like an English. Wits isn't a bad option, but it's a bit of, you're locking yourself up of potentially getting some of these other must-have trade-in options by going Wits. So I think your only options are to save a trade or to go to someone like a Cameron who was clunking a lot of marks and looked very good on the weekend. I don't think Cox is going to affect him as much as people would have thought. but he still had a bit of an interrupted preseason, so it's easy to overlook that when a player has one or two good scores, but that durability question mark will always linger.
Yeah.
The good thing about Darcy Cameron, though, is he's forward eligible, so you can always swing him forward later on in the year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a pretty good option. But yeah, as I said before, it really boils down to who you're bringing in with that cash that you've saved from going Darcy to Cameron.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So moving on to our final discussion point before we go into our overrated, underrated section, or our final versus option, something a little bit different, a little bit left field, which is what we like to see here. Two options, Crouch and Pendles, both midfield options. So this is obviously if you're looking to a midfield option. I'll let you talk about Pendles because I've been quite impressed with what I've seen so far from him. Crouch is an interesting one because obviously Steele's now out for minimum 4 weeks. He has a habit of going on a tear when Steele is not there. I think last year was averaging, he was going 130, 140 without Steele in the side. He really steps up when Steele's not there. What are your thoughts? Say this is obviously applying to people who are quite low in the ranks and want to really shoot up, saving some cash from your 600,000 price points. Out of these two, or anyone else for that matter, who would you bring in as a potential point of difference purely based on the fact that you've seen a role change or something a little bit different that you think they can get 120s and 130s by saving yourself 100K from your Millers and whatnot, who haven't actually started the house on fire, actually haven't started, on like a house on fire like they normally do?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you're picking them at this price to be a keeper, and I don't see them being top 8 mids at all. So if you're looking for a pod, I'd more go down the avenue of looking for a cheap pod in that sense. So someone in like the 200 to 400K range. So if you're looking for some sort of point of differentiation or to get ahead, I'd be more looking at players like Hayden Crozier or Jack Bowes, those sort of types where they'll definitely make money and be safe in that respect, even if the pick blows up. Whereas these two are more like you're chasing points. And whilst Crouch might have a good few weeks without Steele will come back. And Crouch I feel like he always gets talked about as an option because he scores a few good scores, but then he never really gets around the mark in terms of being top 8 mid. So both these guys are pretty irrelevant. But in saying that, Pendles has looked good, but he's quite old now, and I think he's the sort of guy that has the ability to potentially get subbed off a game just to be managed and whatnot. So, yeah, I'd be overlooking those guys and more looking at someone like a cheap sort of mid or defensive option who could be a really good option next week, like your Croziers or Jack Bowes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's understandable. It's a tough one, really, because you want to obviously. I think there'll be come next week with guys like Crozier and, or maybe not Crozier. Well, he's got another week, I think, doesn't he? Because he didn't play first round.
Yeah.
And Bowes. I think there's a few cheaper defenders you might want to get up from. Especially they've got that extra week in their cycle. So moving on to our overrated, underrated segment, we've got a few debatable topics. First one is trading out primos after a poor game based off the eye test. So not just a poor game based off the score, based off their actual role. So both of Ridley and Doherty which unfortunately I own both of, had both questionable roles. What are your thoughts on this? Overrated or underrated? Having to rage trade one of these two, or wanting to rage trade after seeing that something's not right with their role after only one game?
I think it's not overrated, but it's also fair to hold these players because we saw last week what happened with people who traded out Hopper, Laird, and a few other players who then bounced back. But in saying that, Ridley's role looked far worse than Doherty's, so I wouldn't be worried or inclined to trade Doherty out just yet. But with Ridley, played more lockdown, I believe. Zerk Thatcher might be injured, which means Ridley will have to definitely play more lockdown and less loose behind the ball. So I'd be I'd be content if I had Ridley to trade him out to a Daicos, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Doherty, I still see Doherty being a top 6 to 8 mid. So trading him out feels like a bit of a waste. But yeah, it's a tough sort of position because Ridley scored well last week. So it's a bit like you're throwing him out after one subpar score. But yeah, it really depends on the structure of your team. If it gets you Daicos and it's no skin off your nose, I'd be doing that. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just looking up how Essendon lined up round one. They did have Zerk Thatcher, and he actually scored 100 as well. So, and that played Hawthorn. So it's a pretty hard kind of sample size to work with because to give you a bit of context, having watched that game quite closely, being a Ridley owner, they've got a lot of halfbacks now. So you've got 3 pretty much that are ruining Ridley a little bit. You've got McGrath, Redmond, and D'Ambrosio. So they're the ones that are pushing off the back. Having said that, Zerk actually, I think, is stealing points off Ridley than anyone else because they don't really look for Ridley anymore. It's kind of they flip it to whoever's there, and obviously when Zerk Thatcher's there, he's actually not a bad option. The other issue is Redmond's taking all the kickouts predominantly. Ridley takes a few, but nowhere near as the likes of Redmond. So I think he plays obviously our boys on Saturday night, which is a big bonus for him because every time a key defender or an intercept marker plays in Kilda, they go huge. So I would not be surprised at all if Ridley goes berserk on Saturday night. But having said that, he did score a 70, which is not ideal. But he did drop a lot of intercept marks as well. So it's one that it could have been half a decent score. And I remember watching that game in the third quarter, he took a kick out and went out of bounds in the full straight away. So, you take those points with a grain of salt, but it's a little bit of a concern. I'll be watching at least 1 or 2 more weeks of Ridley just to see where he's at. With roll rise because it only takes one of those running defenders to be injured to make him a real good option. Doherty, not so much. I think it's a similar issue with him. You've got the likes of McGovern and Newman, I think, came back into the side or was playing originally, and Sard. So same issue there where Doherty's more of your quarterback who sets up the play and a lot of the ball bypassed him on the weekend. So I think with both of them, Doherty, I think less concerning because he just naturally scores quite well anyway. Like this would be more of his floor game than an average game for him.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
He was working pretty hard for the ball in the last quarter as well. So I think the only issue is losing some of those kick-ins. But say McGovern gets injured or something happens like that, you definitely see Doherty really rising and scoring well again.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to the next overrated, underrated. This was a combined comment from 2 of our followers on Twitter and Discord. Side swap mid prices. So Callahan obviously had a terrible start to that game against West Coast. Well, half GWS just fell apart. Had a shoulder issue, didn't score well. Fife was obviously injured. I know a lot of people have Fife. Never looked right against St Kilda. When you've got, say, mid prices that are going to drop in price or stagnate because of 1 shit score or 2 shit scores. What are your thoughts, overrated, underrated, on swapping to another mid-pricer because you don't want to ruin your structure?
I think it's fine if you see that other mid-pricer with a really good role and they're scoring, say, tons, like a Warple, for instance. I'd be happy to trade Fife. You should probably already have done that after the fact that he missed the game. With Callahan, that's a trickier one because he was looking good. Then last week, obviously, he got that knock to the shoulder and we don't know what the condition of it is. Right. So I'm happy to trade Callahan if it gets you a Setterfield, for instance. But I'm going to probably look at holding him for 1 week purely to see what he does. He's got a very low break even, so he's going to make some money at the worst case. If he goes back to scoring 80s and whatnot, we can comfortably hold. But worst case, I just trade him out to a Crozier or a Bose potentially and go from there. Rather give him 1 more chance because he did look very good in the first week. And if that shoulder was really, really bad, I don't think he would have gone back onto the field. So
yeah, no, 100%.
Fingers crossed he's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned on Patreon that in our write-up articles that Callahan, he played wing, and the problem with playing wing in footy is that when you get smashed, wings are the first ones to lose out on possession because they just don't get the ball. Like the team can't transition as they normally do. And rather than transitioning out to the wings and creating space and whatnot, like good footy players do, they tend to panic and just dumb kick it forward. So it means the likes of Callahan who are stuck out on a wing are just running up on grass all day and not getting much of it. But moving forward to the next overrated, underrated. This is an interesting one because it was brought to my attention about this guy Buckley from GWS who's actually scored very, very well. I don't know what he's priced. I think he's rookie.
Low 200s.
Yeah, low 200s. That's it. So very similar to Machado Owens. Both of these are basically gone head to head with regard. They play different positions, obviously. Head to head with regards to scoring. So I think Buckley and Machado Owens first round around about mid-70s, and they've now gone to high 90s. What are your thoughts on bringing these kind of cheap players that can make a bit of cash quick as a bit of point of difference as well, because not many would own both? What are your thoughts on these two? Well, not these two in particular, but pod cheap players to bring in on the bubble because of a quick cash rise, overrated, underrated?
I think it's overrated. These sort of players, they'll make just as much money as someone like a Caminiti, for instance. You could go down and pick up a 102k player, save yourself that money, and Caminiti will still make 100,000 or so, which will be about the equivalent of what these two players make, and at far less risk because you're committing less money to start with. So I would be avoiding these two because there are just so many good options that you can pick from. You can go down to like a Hollands, for instance, or a Caminiti, or someone else, save yourself 50k plus and get someone who's going to make the equivalent amount of money, albeit they'll be scoring a bit less, but these players aren't probably going to be in your field anyway, so that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Machado Owens is the one that obviously Saints bias. I was hot all preseason, so it's been annoying that I didn't go for him because he actually has started pretty well up forward and looked quite dangerous. But yeah, Buckley I didn't even realise his pricing even existed, to be fair, and he's gone 76 and 99. So it's an interesting one where you'd have to watch on roll in particular with him. Gut feel is I think it's because Whitfield's out. It could have made him score quite well. So it's hard to say because, Cumming didn't do well either. And obviously, he played defence as well. But, I would say that if you're looking like these guys are a little bit point of difference-ish, it is very risky because you just don't know how long they can hold it for. They could crash and burn immediately the next week and you've stuffed it. So, you'd have to have done a fair bit of research into their positions before you move on. So, lucky last before we go into a bit of a rant. Having Setterfield, Warple and Hopper is too many. Obviously, some may have all three already. But in past years, having too many mid-prices just stuffs your cash gen up. But this year might be a little bit different with these three in particular. What are your thoughts? Overrated or underrated?
Overrated. I disagree with the statement. Having Setterfield, Warple and Hopper is fine. It's just tough to get them all in. And if you're compromising the balance of your team and whatnot, like, for instance, if you're fielding all these three in the midfield and then you got Ashcroft and McKenzie on the bench, for instance, or something like that, then I wouldn't be looking at bringing them in. So it really depends on the balance of your team. But they're all going to make plenty of money. So no harm done.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, it's hard because, these three in particular, they play a perfect role for their sides. It's not like they've had three good games. They're both playing, or they're all three of them playing pure mid. I'd almost argue Setterfield's the one that we just don't know what's going to happen against tougher teams, where we've seen it with Warple that they got smashed against Sydney and he still scored well. But having said that, if they play mid and they get enough CBAs, they're probably going to score all right. So it's probably one of the years that you've got three different players that all play a similar role for their club and they're all doing very well for themselves. Before we finish up today, we've got a new segment that we started up last week and we've now got a slide to match for it, called Nags. Unfortunately, he's not here with us today, so me and Jonas can tag team a little bit. But our little gripe this week has got to do with the Freo Footy Club, Supercoach specifically, because I think it's fucked us off with Darcy getting -4 by half time. And I remember someone in my other chat off air actually captained him. So, yeah, it would have been a disaster waiting to happen. But obviously not good enough. Nathan reckons they're playing fake footy, i.e. what St Kilda did last year, where they just bomb it forward and then have no defensive pressure moving back. You look at this is obviously against North. You had Brayshaw, who absolutely fizzled after half-time. He was on 70 at half-time, ended up barely scoring 100. Hayden Young, who, had massive raps on him, obviously had a bit of an injury concern against North. Last week, against North, and then filtered out into a 50. And Darcy was absolutely shocking. What are your thoughts on Freo in general? And in particular, I want your opinion on how bad this ruck combo's been and how overrated it might have been.
Yeah, I can't say I've watched much of Freo, if any, this year. But, yeah, I think it's a funny one because Darcy just does not look like a proper forward, and Jackson, I don't even know what he is. He's athletic, but he also appears to be not really a real true forward either. And they're trying to force one of them to play forward, and it's just not working. So I think it's one of those things where they're going to need to really fix something up, and I expect Fremantle will. They've got too much talent on that list to just sit there and not improve or change up the game style. Longmuir's a pretty decent coach, I thought, as well. So I reckon give them 1 or 2 more weeks, see how they go. If they can't play well against West Coast in what is probably a season-defining clash for them, if they can't beat West Coast and go 0-3, I think the season's basically over. So let's give them 1 more week and then go from there. But, yeah, come on, Longmuir, chuck Darcy up forward a bit more. I mean, no. Chuck Darcy in the ruck a bit more. And maybe Jackson on the ball or something. They need some sort of different combination in the midfield as well, because that hasn't been working. They're a bit too stagnant with Brody and O'Meara there. So let's see what happens this week.
Yeah, I mean, I would know Nathan. I'm assuming would be fuming if Brody was like this last year, but I just don't know what's going on at Freo at the moment. You've got O'Meara, Brayshaw, Brody, Sarong, and you still can't get it right. And you've got Darcy, who's arguably touted as a pretty elite tap ruckman. And I've seen, I saw footage on the weekend, which would be pretty damning, considering that there's points in the play where he's up for the ruck and there's barely a midfield there. So something's not right. It seems like Nathan's a bit on the money with a one-way running Freo where they don't work hard enough back and they're really struggling. Brayshaw would be the only person that does it, I think. O'Meara, wouldn't be surprised if he does fuck all. And Brody and Sarong, I think, are more of your attacking. I mean, Brody's more defensively minded, but there's a serious problem there going on at Freo at the moment if they can't win against North. That's for sure. But in saying that, Supercoach-wise, pull your head in, Longmuir, because we really don't want to seeing 40s from Darcy any longer. But, that's all we got time for today. Hopefully your team didn't do as bad as some of ours, and hopefully you have enough trades to sort out a bit of a shit show that's happened in the last 2 weeks. I know it's been a bit of a carnage week. Well, carnage really 2 weeks. Supercoach has seen with so many injured premiums early. With our premium subscribers, not premium, Patreon subscribers, we'll be hoping to upload a Q&A kind of session again later in the week, as we will normally do for the remainder of the season, probably closer to round 1 teams. If you have any questions for us, that video will always go up there, as well as our round 2 weekly write-up, which goes a lot more in depth than what we normally do on socials. It's just gone up this morning. So if you feel free to subscribe to both tiers, you'll get access to it. It's dirt cheap and it gives us support to develop and grow our content. And we're really appreciative of any support you do decide to give us. But until then, have have fun trying to decide who to trade in and trade out, and we'll catch you for the weekly Q&A later this week.